One day, a man went to the market wearing a white shirt. By evening, the shirt was still white, but his heart was heavy. Why? Because everyone had an opinion about him, and he tried to wear all of them. Let me ask you a question. How many of you are tired? Not because life is hard, but because you are carrying other people's opinions. If that sounds familiar, then this talk is not for you. It is for your heart. We live in a time where opinions travel faster than truth. Someone looks at you for 5 minutes and feels qualified to define your entire character. A comment made casually, sometimes without thought, can sit in the mind for days. Slowly, quietly, these opinions begin to pile up, not as words anymore, but as weight. From a very young age, approval becomes a kind of invisible currency. Good behavior is rewarded with praise, silence is mistaken for acceptance, and disagreement is often treated as failure. Over time, this trains the mind to look outward for confirmation instead of inward for clarity. Choices begin to shift. Clothes are chosen not for comfort, but for validation. Dreams are filtered through what will sound respectable. Even silence becomes strategic, shaped by fear of being misunderstood. The mind starts running two parallel lives. One is the life being lived. The other is the life being observed, judged and edited in advance by imagined critics. This second life is exhausting. It never rests. It constantly scans for reactions, expressions, tones, pauses. A small remark becomes replay material. A casual joke becomes a personal verdict. The heart slowly forgets how light it once was. What makes this weight heavier is not the opinion itself, but the belief that every opinion deserves a response. There is a subtle pressure to explain, justify, clarify, and defend. Energy that could have been used to grow is spent trying to correct perception. Instead of asking what feels right, the mind asks what will be accepted. Instead of listening to intuition, it listens to noise. The strange part is that opinions are often inconsistent. One group says one thing, another says the opposite. Trying to satisfy both is like trying to walk in two directions at the same time. The result is not balance, but fracture. Identity becomes scattered, shaped differently depending on who is watching. Slowly, authenticity is replaced with performance. Carrying other people's opinions also creates fear of movement. Growth becomes risky because growth invites attention. Change invites commentary. Staying the same feels safer, even when it hurts. This is how potential gets delayed, not by lack of talent, but by excess concern. The weight does not come from criticism alone. It comes from attachment to it. There is also comparison hidden inside opinions. Not direct comparison, but implied. Someone's success becomes a mirror held too close. Someone's pace becomes an unspoken standard. Without realizing it, the mind starts racing against timelines that were never meant for it. The joy of personal progress gets replaced by anxiety of being behind. Over time, this constant evaluation dulls self-trust. Decisions are second, guessed before they are even made. Confidence becomes conditional. Peace feels temporary, dependent on approval staying intact. When approval fades, so does stability. Life begins to feel like walking on a surface that can collapse at any moment. Yet the truth remains simple and quiet beneath all this noise. Opinions are reflections of perspectives, not measurements of worth. They carry the limits, experiences, fears, and beliefs of the person expressing them. Treating them as absolute truth gives them power they were never meant to have. Releasing the weight does not require rebellion or withdrawal. It begins with awareness, awareness that not every voice needs to be carried, awareness that listening does not mean absorbing, awareness that silence can be strength, and detachment can be care for the self. When the weight of opinions is put down, something surprising happens, breath deepens, choices feel clearer, there is space to hear one's own thoughts again. Life does not become free of criticism, but it becomes free of captivity to it. And in that freedom, the journey back to oneself quietly begins. From early on, there is an unspoken lesson taught by the world. Adjust yourself so you can fit in more places. So the personality is trimmed here, stretched there, softened in one room and sharpened in another. Slowly, the idea forms that being liked is the same as being right, and being accepted is the same as being successful. Without realizing it, life starts feeling like a product placed on a shelf, waiting for approval. But no product is designed for everyone. Even the most loved things in the world have people who reject them. Some find them too much, others too little. This is not a flaw in the product. It is the nature of difference. Yet, when it comes to ourselves, we forget this simple truth. We expect universal appreciation from a world built on variety. Trying to be acceptable to everyone creates a quiet inner conflict. Values get diluted to avoid disagreement. Opinions are softened to prevent discomfort. Strength is mistaken for arrogance, kindness for weakness, silence for lack of confidence. In trying to manage these labels, the self slowly disappears behind expectations. Life becomes a series of adjustments rather than expressions. The problem is not that people have preferences. The problem is believing those preferences are obligations. One person's comfort becomes another person's irritation. One person's honesty becomes another person's offense. If every reaction is taken personally, identity begins to fragment. What remains is confusion about who one really is when no one is watching. There is also a hidden arrogance in trying to be for everyone. It assumes control over how others should feel. But emotions and opinions are not contracts. They arise from personal histories, moods, beliefs, and experiences that have nothing to do with us. Carrying responsibility for them is unnecessary and unfair. When the mind starts believing it must satisfy everyone, it also starts fearing rejection excessively. Disapproval feels like danger instead of difference. Even neutral responses feel negative. This creates constant tension, as if life is an exam with invisible evaluators everywhere. Joy becomes conditional, tied to how well the performance is received. The truth is, authenticity automatically limits audience size, and that is not loss, it is clarity. When you stand in alignment with your values, some people naturally step closer, and others step away. Both movements are important. The ones who step away create space. The ones who stay create connection. Without this sorting, relationships remain shallow and exhausting. Being yourself does not guarantee admiration, but it guarantees coherence. There is less inner noise because there is less pretending. Decisions may still be questioned, but they feel grounded. Even disagreement feels lighter when it does not threaten identity. Life becomes less about managing impressions and more about living with integrity. Releasing the need to be for everyone is not isolation. It is self-respect. It is choosing truth over applause, depth over popularity, peace over approval. In that choice, there is relief. The constant tension eases, and the self no longer feels like something that needs to be solved. In everyday life, words are often delivered without care for how they will land. Some are meant to guide, some are meant to impress, and some are simply meant to release frustration. Yet they all arrive in the same form, sentences spoken with confidence. The challenge is not hearing them, but understanding what they truly are. There is a quiet difference between feedback and judgment, but it is often overlooked. Feedback is rooted in observation. It focuses on actions, choices, or outcomes. Judgment, on the other hand, targets identity. One speaks about what can be improved, the other declares what someone is. When this difference is not recognized, everything sounds personal and growth begins to feel like attack. Feedback usually carries clarity. Even when it is uncomfortable, it has a direction. It may say something is incomplete, ineffective, or misaligned, but it leaves room to grow. Judgment closes that door. It uses labels, assumptions, and conclusions. It offers no path forward, only a verdict. Confusing the two leads to unnecessary pain. The mind tends to react before it understands. A defensive wall goes up, and listening shuts down. Past experiences rush in to protect the ego. Old wounds get touched by new words. In that moment, even helpful guidance can feel threatening. This is why emotional awareness matters more than intellectual understanding. Learning to pause creates space between words and worth. Instead of immediately absorbing what is said, it helps to observe how it is said and from where it comes. Is the speaker invested in growth or in control? Are they sharing insight or projecting frustration? This observation turns reaction into response. There is also a responsibility on the receiving end. Feedback loses its value if it is rejected purely because it is uncomfortable. Growth often comes disguised as inconvenience. Listening without collapsing is a skill. It allows improvement without self-attack. It keeps dignity intact while still welcoming learning. Judgment, however, does not deserve the same access. When words are rooted in insecurity, comparison, or superiority, they reflect the speaker more than the subject. Accepting such words as truth is like letting someone else rewrite your story without understanding it. Discernment is protection, not arrogance. Over time, recognizing the difference changes emotional balance. Criticism no longer feels like a storm. Some words are filtered out, others are stored as tools. Confidence becomes quieter but stronger. It is no longer dependent on being untouched, but on being clear about what belongs and what does not. This clarity brings maturity. It allows learning without losing self-respect. It allows rejection without resentment. It allows improvement without humiliation. When feedback is used wisely and judgment is placed where it belongs, inner stability begins to form, steady and unshaken by every passing opinion. There is a voice that speaks even when the world is silent. It comments on every action, questions every decision, and reminds us of every past mistake with surprising accuracy. This voice does not need an audience. It lives within, familiar and persistent. Often it speaks with authority, as if it knows the truth better than anyone else. This inner critic usually does not appear overnight. It is slowly assembled over years. A comment once heard, a comparison once felt, a failure once experienced. These moments gather and form patterns. Over time, the mind starts repeating them automatically, believing repetition to be evidence. What was once external becomes internal, and the loudest judgments no longer come from outside. The inner critic often disguises itself as protection. It claims to be preparing us for disappointment, preventing embarrassment, or pushing us toward improvement. But its method is harsh. Instead of guidance, it uses shame. Instead of direction, it uses fear. Instead of encouragement, it uses comparison. Growth under such pressure becomes heavy and joyless. What makes this voice powerful is familiarity. Because it has been heard for so long, it feels true. The mind assumes that anything repeated must be accurate, but repetition does not equal truth. It only means habit. Without questioning it, this voice becomes the lens through which everything is evaluated. Achievements feel small. Mistakes feel permanent. The inner critic rarely speaks in facts. It speaks in absolutes. Words like always, never, everyone, no one. These words simplify reality and remove nuance. One failure becomes a pattern, one delay becomes incompetence, one rejection becomes proof of unworthiness. When these exaggerations are believed, confidence slowly erodes. Meeting this inner critic does not require silencing it completely. That struggle often creates more tension. What helps is recognition, noticing when the voice appears, how it speaks, and what it triggers. Awareness reduces its authority. Once the voice is observed, it loses its power to dictate. Replacing harshness with curiosity shifts the relationship. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" the question becomes, "What is this trying to protect?" Often, beneath criticism lies fear of being inadequate, unseen, or left behind. Addressing the fear softens the voice. Self-compassion is not weakness, it is realism. It allows mistakes without self-destruction. It allows ambition without self-hatred. It understands that growth includes pauses, detours, and imperfections. When the inner critic is met with patience rather than punishment, it slowly changes tone. As this relationship evolves, the mind becomes a safer place to live. Thoughts become less hostile. Motivation feels cleaner. Progress continues, not driven by fear of failure, but by trust in the ability to learn. In that safety, the self begins to unfold without resistance. There is a common misunderstanding that accepting oneself means settling for less. That if flaws are acknowledged, improvement will stop. This belief creates a false conflict between growth and acceptance, as if only one can exist at a time. In reality, growth that comes without acceptance is harsh, and acceptance without growth is incomplete. Self-acceptance begins with honesty. It looks at strengths without arrogance and weaknesses without shame. It does not deny areas that need effort, nor does it exaggerate them into identity. It simply sees what is present. From this clarity, movement becomes possible. Resistance decreases when there is no inner fight. When acceptance is missing, improvement turns into punishment. Goals become weapons. Discipline feels like self-attack. Every mistake is treated as evidence of failure rather than part of learning. This creates exhaustion. The mind pushes forward, but the heart resists. Progress becomes slow and heavy. Acceptance, on the other hand, creates a stable foundation. When the self feels safe, it becomes flexible. Feedback is easier to receive. Effort feels purposeful instead of desperate. There is space to fail and try again without collapsing emotionally. This safety does not reduce standards, it supports them. True acceptance does not say, "This is enough, stop here." It says, "This is where you are, start here." It removes the illusion that worth must be earned before growth can begin. Growth becomes an expression of care, not a reaction to shame. Many people confuse acceptance with comfort. Comfort avoids challenge. Acceptance embraces reality. From reality, challenge naturally arises. When limits are acknowledged, skill can be built. When habits are seen clearly, they can be changed. Ignoring reality delays growth. Accepting it accelerates it. There is also patience in acceptance. Not everything improves at the same speed. Some changes require time, repetition, and setbacks. Without acceptance, impatience turns inward and becomes self-criticism. With acceptance, patience becomes strength. Progress is measured over time, not moments. When acceptance and ambition work together, motivation becomes balanced. There is drive without pressure, effort without self-hate. The mind learns to encourage rather than threaten. This creates sustainable growth instead of cycles of burnout and guilt. Living this way allows improvement to feel human. Mistakes do not erase progress. Pauses do not cancel intention. The journey continues without constant self-judgment. In that balance, The self moves forward steadily, not because it feels unworthy, but because it feels capable. Not all criticism arrives with kindness, but sometimes wisdom arrives without comfort. There are moments when words spoken by others point to something that truly needs attention. The challenge is not in hearing those words, but in allowing them to teach without letting them wound. When criticism is useful, it usually speaks about behavior, effort, or direction. It highlights gaps that are not always visible from within. No matter how self-aware a person is, blind spots remain. Another perspective can illuminate what familiarity hides. When this happens, resistance often blocks learning before it begins. The ego reacts quickly. It wants to protect identity, defend intention, and explain context. While intention matters, impact also matters. Growth begins when the focus shifts from proving innocence to understanding effect. This shift is uncomfortable, but it is necessary for maturity. Learning from criticism requires emotional stability. If self-worth is fragile, every remark feels like a threat. But when worth is grounded, criticism becomes information rather than attack. The words may still sting, but they do not define. They inform. It is also important to separate tone from truth. Sometimes the message is valid even when the delivery is poor. Rejecting everything because of how it was said can delay growth. At the same time, accepting everything without reflection can harm confidence. Balance lies in extracting the lesson and discarding the hostility. Growth-oriented criticism often repeats itself from different sources. When the same pattern is pointed out by multiple people in different ways, it deserves attention. Patterns are teachers. They reveal habits that shape outcomes. Ignoring them keeps the cycle alive. Using criticism as a teacher requires humility. Not the humility that lowers self-worth, but the humility that allows learning. It recognizes that being a learner is not weakness. It is strength in motion. Those who grow the most are not those who avoid correction, but those who know how to use it. Reflection turns criticism into insight. Instead of replaying the words emotionally, examining them calmly changes their effect. Questions like what can be adjusted, what can be improved, and what can be practiced shift the mind from hurt to action. When criticism is used this way, it loses its sharp edges. It becomes part of refinement rather than rejection. Over time, this approach builds resilience. The mind becomes less reactive, more receptive. Learning continues without losing balance, and progress becomes steady and intentional. There are moments when criticism carries no lesson, no guidance, and no concern for growth. It arrives sharp, dismissive, or careless. In such moments, the purpose is not improvement but reaction. This kind of criticism tests inner stability rather than skill or effort. The first instinct is often to defend. The mind rushes to justify, explain, or counterattack. Silence feels like weakness, and restraint feels like loss. But not every comment requires participation. Some words are meant to provoke, not to help. Recognizing this changes the role from participant to observer. This kind of criticism often says more about the speaker's state than the subject. Frustration, insecurity, unmet expectations, or personal struggles leak into words. When this is understood, the criticism loses its authority. It no longer feels personal, it feels misplaced. The test lies in emotional control. Reacting impulsively hands power to the moment. Responding thoughtfully preserves dignity. Sometimes the strongest response is no response. Not out of avoidance, but out of clarity. Choosing peace over proving a point is a sign of inner strength. There is also the challenge of delayed reaction. Even when silence is chosen, the words may echo later. The mind replays them, searching for meaning. This is where grounding becomes important. Returning to facts, values, and self-knowledge helps neutralize lingering impact. Resilience grows through these encounters. Each time criticism is faced without internal collapse, confidence deepens, not the loud confidence that argues, but the quiet confidence that knows its ground. This confidence does not need validation or victory. Boundaries are refined through such tests. Understanding what deserves attention and what does not is a skill learned through experience. Without boundaries, the self becomes porous, absorbing everything. With boundaries, the self remains open but protected. These moments also reveal emotional maturity. Strength is no longer measured by how strongly one reacts, but by how well one remains steady. The ability to stay calm in the presence of unfairness builds inner authority. When criticism is treated as a test rather than a threat, it stops shaping identity. It becomes a passing event, not a defining moment. The self remains intact, centered, and unaffected by noise that was never meant to guide. There is a quiet strength in knowing where to stop. Not every situation requires access, and not every person deserves entry into inner space. Without boundaries, even well-intended interactions can become draining. Energy leaks not because of effort, but because of overexposure. Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls. In truth, they are filters. They decide what enters and what stays outside. A wall isolates, but a boundary protects. It allows connection without depletion. When boundaries are absent, the self becomes constantly available, constantly responsive, and slowly exhausted. Many people struggle to set boundaries because they fear misunderstanding. Saying no feels rude, distance feels like rejection, silence feels like conflict, but boundaries are not punishments. They are instructions. They communicate limits without hostility. They protect peace without creating distance in the heart. Without boundaries, criticism enters unchecked. Every comment feels important. Every reaction feels urgent. The mind stays alert, waiting for the next disturbance. Over time, this hyper-awareness turns into anxiety. Peace becomes rare, not because life is chaotic, but because there is no protection. Healthy boundaries are often quiet. They do not need explanations or announcements. They are expressed through consistency, through what is responded to and what is not, through what is entertained and what is allowed to pass. This consistency teaches others how to engage. Setting boundaries also requires self-trust. It means believing that personal needs matter, that rest is not laziness, that silence is not weakness, that stepping back is sometimes necessary to stay whole. Without this belief, boundaries feel like guilt instead of care. Boundaries evolve with growth. What once felt acceptable may no longer feel aligned. This change is natural. Updating boundaries is not betrayal, it is awareness. Holding on to old limits out of habit can be just as harmful as having none. When boundaries are respected internally, external interactions become clearer. There is less resentment because there is less overgiving, less emotional build-up because there is less suppression. Relationships feel cleaner, not heavier. With boundaries in place, criticism loses its reach. It may still be heard, but it no longer invades. The self remains centered, calm, and protected. In that space, energy is preserved, clarity is maintained, and inner peace becomes sustainable rather than occasional. There is a difference between standing tall and being loud. True stability is quiet. It does not announce itself or seek confirmation. It simply remains. When inner grounding is strong, external reactions lose their ability to disturb. Many people build confidence from applause. Compliments feel like fuel, and approval feels like safety, but what is built on response is fragile. The moment response changes, the foundation shakes. When praise decreases or criticism appears, self-belief begins to tremble. Rootedness comes from values rather than validation. Values do not change with mood or opinion. They provide direction when clarity is missing. When actions align with values, there is a sense of internal agreement. Even if the outcome is questioned, the intention remains intact. Being rooted within means knowing what matters and why. It means understanding personal limits, principles, and priorities. This understanding creates inner order. Decisions become less reactive and more deliberate. The mind does not swing with every external signal. External situations will always fluctuate. Success and failure arrive without warning. Praise and criticism alternate. If identity is tied to these cycles, emotional stability becomes impossible. But when identity is anchored within, experiences are processed without distortion. This inner grounding does not eliminate emotion. It regulates it. Disappointment is felt without despair. Appreciation is received without dependence. Confidence exists without arrogance. Humility exists without self-erasure. Balance becomes natural. There is also courage in being rooted. It allows standing alone without feeling abandoned. It allows disagreement without fear of rejection. It allows authenticity without needing permission. This courage does not come from certainty about outcomes, but from trust in self. Being rooted within also reduces comparison. Other people's journeys no longer feel threatening. Differences are seen as variations, not competitions. There is room to admire without diminishing oneself. Progress is measured inwardly rather than publicly. Over time, this inner stability becomes visible, not through dominance or display, but through calm presence. Reactions soften, decisions strengthen. The self remains steady even when circumstances shift. In that steadiness, life feels less chaotic and more intentional. The world is rarely quiet. Opinions circulate constantly, expectations overlap, and distractions compete for attention. In this environment, living authentically requires intention. Without it, life becomes reactive, shaped by what is loudest rather than what is truest. Authenticity begins with alignment. Thoughts, words, and actions move in the same direction. When this alignment is missing, inner conflict arises. Saying what is expected while feeling something else creates tension. Over time, this tension turns into fatigue. Living authentically removes this friction, not by eliminating challenge, but by eliminating pretense. Noise often pressures conformity. Trends suggest how to think, what to value, and how to measure success. When these suggestions are followed without reflection, individuality fades. Authentic living requires the courage to pause and choose intentionally rather than follow automatically. There is discomfort in being real. Not everyone understands it. Some may feel challenged by it. Some may misunderstand it. This discomfort is temporary, but the peace that follows is lasting. Pretending offers short-term comfort but long-term emptiness. Authenticity also requires patience. Growth is not always visible or impressive. Staying true to personal values may feel slow in a fast, moving world, but depth is built slowly. Meaning is not rushed. Living authentically means trusting this pace even when it is questioned. Noise thrives on reaction. Authenticity thrives on response. Reacting gives away control. Responding preserves it. This distinction creates emotional freedom. Instead of being pulled into every debate or expectation, energy is invested where it truly matters. Living authentically does not mean rejecting the world. It means engaging with it honestly, listening without losing self, adapting without abandoning values, participating without performing. This balance keeps connection alive without self-betrayal. Over time, authenticity simplifies life. Decisions feel clearer. Relationships feel more genuine. Effort feels purposeful. The need for constant explanation fades because actions speak consistently. In a noisy world, authenticity is not loud, it is steady, it is felt more than heard. It does not compete for attention, yet it leaves an impact. Living this way allows life to be experienced fully, without distortion, without masks, and without regret. As everything comes together, one truth stands quietly at the center of it all. Peace is not found by controlling the world, but by understanding the self. When self-acceptance becomes natural, criticism no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes either a lesson or a passing sound. Life does not ask for perfection. It asks for presence. It asks for honesty with who you are and patience with who you are becoming. The moment you stop fighting yourself, the world loses its power to shake you. Not every voice needs to be answered. Not every opinion needs to be carried. What truly matters will remain even when the noise fades. When you stand rooted in your values, guided by awareness, and gentle with yourself, you move forward with clarity rather than confusion. In that clarity, criticism becomes smaller, fear becomes quieter, and confidence becomes calm. And from that calm, life is lived not to impress, but to express fully, freely, and truthfully.